For the second time that day, André-Louis set out for the chateau. He walked quickly and ignored the curious eyes that followed him through the village. He also ignored the whispers of the people. They were all excited by the day's event, and they knew he had been a part of it. Benoit, the elderly servant who was grandly called the seneschal, showed him into the ground floor room. People traditionally called this room the library. It still contained several shelves of neglected books, which gave the room its name. However, hunting equipment like shotguns, powder horns, hunting bags, and sheath knives were much more noticeable than any study materials. The furniture was massive and made of richly carved oak from a past age. Great massive oak beams crossed the rather high whitewashed ceiling. The short, stout Lord of Gavrillac was pacing restlessly when André-Louis entered. The Lord announced at once that he already knew what had happened at the Breton Armory. He said that Monsieur de Chaberlain had just left him, and he confessed that he was deeply grieved and very confused. He bowed his enormous head and said,
"It is such a pity. He was such an admirable young man, and he was so full of promise. This La Tour d'Azyr is a hard man, and he feels very strongly about these matters. He might be right. I do not know. I have never killed a man for having different opinions from mine. In fact, I have never killed a man at all. It is not in my nature. I would not be able to sleep at night if I did. But men are built differently."
André-Louis was quite calm and collected, but his face was very pale. He said,
"The question, my godfather, is what we must do now."
Monsieur de Kercadia stared at him blankly with his pale eyes. He asked,
"Why, what is there to do? From what I heard, Vilmorin went so far as to strike the Marquis."
André-Louis replied,
"He did that under the most extreme provocation. But he provoked that himself with his revolutionary language. The poor boy's head was full of that encyclopedia trash. That comes from reading too much. I have never placed much value on books, André. I have never seen anything but trouble come from learning. It unsettles a man. It complicates his views on life, and it destroys the simplicity that brings peace of mind and happiness. Let this miserable affair be a warning to you, André. You are too eager yourself to explore these new theories about changing the social order. You see what happens as a result. A fine, admirable young man forgets himself. He forgets his position and his duty to his widowed mother, who has no one else to support her. He forgets everything, and he goes and gets himself killed like this. It is terribly sad. Upon my soul, it is sad."
He pulled out a handkerchief and blew his nose loudly. André-Louis felt a tightness in his heart. The hopes he had placed on his godfather were never very high, but now they faded even more. He said,
"Your criticisms are all aimed at the actions of the dead man, and you have none for the murderer. It is impossible that you could sympathize with such a crime."
Monsieur de Kercadia shrieked.
"Crime? My God! Boy, you were talking about Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr."
André-Louis said,
"I am talking about him and the horrible murder he has committed."
Monsieur de Kercadia spoke very firmly. He said,
"Stop. I cannot allow you to use such words about him. I cannot permit it. The Marquis is my friend, and we will likely become even closer relatives very soon."
André-Louis asked,
"Even after this?"
Monsieur de Kercadia was clearly impatient. He said,
"Why, what does this have to do with it? I might regret it, but I have no right to condemn it. That is a common way for gentlemen to settle their differences."
André-Louis asked,
"Do you really believe that?"
Monsieur de Kercadia replied,
"What exactly are you implying, André? Would I say something that I do not believe? You are starting to make me angry."
André-Louis said,
"Thou shalt not kill is the king's law as well as God's law."
Monsieur de Kercadia said,
"I think you are determined to argue with me. It was a duel."
André-Louis interrupted him and said,
"It was no more a duel than if they had fought with pistols and only the Marquis's weapon was loaded." He invited Philippe to discuss the matter further with the clear intention of forcing an argument and killing him. "Please be patient with me, my godfather. I am not telling you what I imagine, but what the Marquis himself admitted to me.
Monsieur de Kercadia was a little overwhelmed by the young man's seriousness, and he looked away. He turned with a shrug and walked slowly over to the window. He said,
We would need a court of honor to decide such a matter, and we do not have courts of honor.
André-Louis said.
But we have courts of justice.
The Lord turned around to face him again with returning irritation. He asked,
And what court of justice do you think would listen to the kind of argument you seem to have in mind?
André-Louis said.
There is the court of the king's lieutenant at Rennes.
Monsieur de Kercadia asked.
And do you think the king's lieutenant would listen to you?
André-Louis replied.
Perhaps he would not listen to me, sir. But if you were to bring the complaint to him...
Monsieur de Kercadia's pale eyes grew wide with horror at the suggestion. He repeated,
I bring the complaint?
André-Louis pointed out.
The event happened here on your land.
Monsieur de Kercadia said.
You expect me to bring a complaint against Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr. I think you have lost your mind. Oh, you are crazy. You are just as crazy as that poor friend of yours who died because he interfered in things that were none of his business. The language he used here to the Marquis about maybe was incredibly insulting. Perhaps you did not know that. It does not surprise me at all that the Marquis wanted to defend his honor.
André-Louis spoke with a feeling of hopelessness. He said,
I understand.
Monsieur de Kercadia demanded.
You understand? What on earth do you understand?
André-Louis answered.
I see that I will have to rely only on myself.
Monsieur de Kercadia asked.
And what exactly do you plan to do, if I may ask?
André-Louis said.
I will go to Rennes, and I will present the facts to the king's lieutenant.
Monsieur de Kercadia replied.
He will be too busy to see you.
His mind jumped around a bit, as weak minds often do.
There is already enough trouble in Rennes because of this crazy States General. Our wonderful Monsieur Necker is supposed to use it to fix the kingdom's finances. As if a lowly Swiss bank clerk, who is also a cursed Protestant, could succeed where great men like Calonne and Brienne have failed.
André-Louis said.
Good afternoon, my godfather.
Monsieur de Kercadia demanded in a complaining tone.
Where are you going?
André-Louis replied.
I am going home for now. I will go to Rennes in the morning.
The short, stout man rolled forward. His large, ugly face showed affectionate concern, and he placed one of his chubby hands on his godson's shoulder. He reasoned with him and said,
Wait, boy, wait. Now listen to me, André. This is pure knight-errantry. It is nonsense and lunacy. You will get nothing good out of this if you continue. You have read Don Quixote, and you know what happened to him when he tried to fight windmills. That is exactly what will happen to you, neither more nor less. Leave things the way they are, my boy. I do not want any harm to come to you.
André-Louis looked at him and smiled weakly. He said,
I swore an oath today. I would damn my soul if I broke it.
Monsieur de Kercadia bristled again, since he was impulsive and inconsistent. He said,
Do you mean that you will go despite anything I might say? Very well, then go. Go to the devil.
André-Louis said,
I will begin with the king's lieutenant.
The Lord yelled in anger.
And if you get into the trouble you are looking for, do not come crying to me for help. Since you choose to disobey me, you can go smash your empty head against the windmill and be damned.
André-Louis bowed with a hint of irony and walked to the door. From the doorway, he said,
If the windmill proves to be too difficult to fight, I might see what I can do with the wind itself. Goodbye, my godfather.
He was gone. Monsieur de Kercadia was left alone, and his face was purple. He tried to figure out the meaning of that last mysterious comment. He was not at all happy, either about his godson or about Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr. He felt angry at both of them. He found these stubborn, strong-willed men who relentlessly followed their own impulses to be very disturbing and irritating. He loved his comfort, and he wanted to live in peace with his neighbors. To him, peace seemed so clearly to be the greatest good in life. Because of this, he considered anyone who bothered to seek other things to be a fool. Chapter 6. The Windmill. A regular stagecoach service ran 3 times a week between Nantes and Rennes in both directions. For 24 livres, which was about the same as an English guinea, it would carry a passenger the 70-odd miles in about 14 hours. Once a week, one of the coaches would detour from the main road to stop at Gavrillac. It delivered mail and newspapers, and it occasionally picked up passengers. André-Louis usually took this coach when he needed to travel. But right now, he was in too much of a hurry to wait a whole day for it. Instead, he hired a horse from the local Breton inn and set out the next morning. He rode briskly for an hour under a gray winter sky. The half-ruined road took him through 10 miles of flat, uninteresting country until he finally reached the city of Rennes. He rode across the main bridge over the Vilaine River. This brought him into the upper and principal part of that important city. Rennes had about 30,000 residents. Judging by the loud and restless crowds blocking his way everywhere, André-Louis guessed that almost all of them had taken to the streets today. Clearly, Philippe had not exaggerated the excitement sweeping through the area. He pushed forward as best he could and finally reached the Place Royale. The crowd was incredibly dense here. A pale young man stood on the base of the equestrian statue of King Louis XV and excitedly addressed the multitude. His youth and clothing showed that he was a student. A group of his classmates acted as an honor guard and kept the immediate area around the statue clear. Over the heads of the crowd, André-Louis caught a few phrases shouted by the eager speaker.
It was the promise of the king. It is the king's authority they ignore. They claim total power over Brittany for themselves. The king has dissolved them. These insolent nobles are defying their sovereign and the people.
Philippe had already told him about the events pushing the Third Estate toward active revolt. But even if he had not known, those few phrases would have explained everything. André-Louis thought this public anger was perfect for his own needs. He hoped the unrest might make the king's lieutenant more reasonable. With this in mind, he pushed on up the wide, paved Rue Royale, where the crowd began to thin out. He left his hired horse at the Corne de Cerf Inn and set out on foot toward the Palais de Justice. A noisy mob was fighting near the wooden poles and scaffolding around the cathedral. Construction on the building had started a year ago, but André-Louis did not stop to figure out why the crowd had gathered there. He kept walking and soon arrived at the handsome Italian-style palace. It was one of the few public buildings that had survived the terrible fire 60 years ago. He struggled through the doors and finally reached the Great Hall, which was known as the Hall of Lost Steps. There, he managed to find an usher who agreed to pass a message to the powerful official in charge of this shrine of justice. The usher announced that a lawyer from Gavrillac humbly requested an audience regarding a very serious matter. After that, André-Louis was left waiting for a full half-hour. The powerful official only agreed to see him because of the tense political climate. Finally, André-Louis was escorted up the broad stone staircase. He was led into a large, barely furnished waiting room. He joined a crowd of other waiting clients, who were mostly men. He spent another half-hour there. He used the time to plan exactly what he would say. As he thought about it, he realized the weakness of his case. He was about to present his argument to a man whose views on law and morality were entirely shaped by his high social rank. At last, he was guided through a narrow but massive, highly decorated door. He entered a beautiful, bright room. It was filled with enough gold trim and satin to furnish a fashionable lady's private bedroom. It was a silly setting for a king's lieutenant, but there was nothing silly about the king's lieutenant himself, at least to normal people. That exalted man sat at the far end of the room, to the right of a tall window looking over the inner courtyard. He worked at an ornate desk decorated with paintings and heavy gold bronze. He wore a scarlet coat with a bright medal on its chest. A cloud of lace spilled from his collar, holding diamonds that sparkled like drops of water. Above all this sat the massive, powdered head of Monsieur de Lestiguières. He leaned back and scowled at his visitor. He looked so arrogant that André-Louis wondered if the man expected him to drop to his knees. The official saw a lean young man with a sharp jaw and straight, limp black hair. André-Louis wore a brown riding coat with a cape, yellow buckskin pants, and knee boots splashed with mud. Seeing this, the scowl on the mighty official's face deepened until his thick black eyebrows met above his large hooked nose.
You announce yourself as a lawyer of Gavrilac with an important communication.
He growled. His tone was an absolute command. He expected André-Louis to speak quickly and not waste the valuable time of a king's lieutenant. Monsieur de Lesdiguières considered himself a terrifying figure, and he had good reason to think so. Over the years, he had seen many poor men scared out of their wits by his thunderous voice. He waited to see the same fear strike this young lawyer from Gavrilac, but he waited in vain. André-Louis found him completely ridiculous. He knew that showing off was just a mask for weakness and a lack of real worth. And right here, he was looking at arrogance in the flesh. It was obvious in the haughty tilt of the man's head, his dark scowl, and the deep boom of his voice. It is hard for a man to look like a hero to his own servant, who sees him put on his impressive clothes piece by piece. It is even harder for a man to look like a hero to someone who studies human nature and sees through those tricks. André-Louis stepped forward boldly. Monsieur de Lesdiguières thought it was downright disrespectful.
You are His Majesty's lieutenant here in Brittany,
André-Louis said. To the mighty lord of life and death, it seemed this young man had the incredible nerve to speak to him as an equal.
You are the one who hands out the king's highest justice in this province.
Surprise spread across the official's handsome, pale face beneath his heavy white wig.
Is your business about this terrible rebellion of the common people?
He asked.
It is not, sir.
The black eyebrows rose.
Then why the devil are you bothering me now? All my attention is needed for this obvious and disgraceful emergency. The matter that brings me here is just as disgraceful and just as urgent. It will have to wait.
The great man thundered in a rage. He tossed back the lace from his wrist and reached for the small silver bell on his desk.
Wait a moment, sir.
André-Louis spoke with a commanding tone. Monsieur de Lesdiguières stopped, absolutely amazed by the young man's boldness.
I can explain it very quickly. Haven't I already told you? And when you have heard it...
André-Louis continued relentlessly, cutting off the official's interruption.
You will agree with me about how serious it is.
Monsieur de Lesdiguières stared at him with stern anger.
What is your name?
He asked.
André-Louis Moreau. Very well, André-Louis Moreau. If you can make your case quickly, I will listen. But I warn you, I will be extremely angry if you cannot justify your rude persistence at such a bad time. You shall be the judge of that, sir.
André-Louis said. He started explaining his case immediately. He began with the shooting of Maybe, and then moved on to the killing of Monsieur de Vilmorin. But he held back the name of the powerful gentleman he was accusing until the very end. He was sure that if he said the name too early, he would not be allowed to finish. He had a natural talent for public speaking. He did not fully realize his own power yet, though he was destined to discover it very soon. He told his story well. He avoided exaggeration, but his simple words had an irresistible force. Gradually, the great man's forbidding face relaxed. A look of interest and almost sympathy appeared on his features.
And who, sir, is the man you accuse of this? The Marquis de La Tour d'Azyr.
That terrifying name had an immediate effect. The official's face shifted from sympathy to shocked anger, followed by an arrogance even worse than before.
Who?
He shouted. Without waiting for an answer, he stormed on.
What incredible nerve! To come to me with a charge like this against a man as important as Monsieur de La Tour d'Azyr. How dare you call him a coward? I call him a murderer.
The young man corrected him.
And I demand justice against him. You demand it, do you? My God, what next? That is for you to say, sir.
The bold reply surprised the great gentleman so much that he made a successful effort to control himself.
Let me warn you,
he said bitterly.
It is not wise to make wild accusations against a nobleman. Doing that is a punishable crime, as you may soon learn. Now listen to me. Let us assume your story about maybe is exact. The gamekeeper might have gone slightly past his duty, but it is such a minor thing it is hardly worth mentioning. Consider, too, that this is not a matter for the king's lieutenant. It belongs entirely to the local court controlled by Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr himself. His own appointed judges must handle it, since it involves his own land and power. Since you are a lawyer, you shouldn't need me to tell you that. As a lawyer, I am prepared to argue that point. But as a lawyer, I also realize that if we pushed the case, it would only end in the unfair punishment of a wretched gamekeeper. He was just following orders, but they would use him as a scapegoat if they needed one. I am not interested in hanging Benet on the gallows that Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr deserves.
Monsieur de Lesdiguières slammed his hand violently onto the table.
My God!
He cried out. Then he added more quietly, with a threatening edge to his voice.
You are remarkably insolent, my man. I assure you, sir, that is not my intention. I am a lawyer arguing a case. It is the case of Monsieur de Vilmorin. I have come to beg the king's justice for his murder. But you just said it was a duel,
cried the lieutenant, caught between anger and utter confusion.
I said that it was made to look like a duel. There is a huge difference, as I will show you, if you will kindly hear me out. Take your time, sir,
said Monsieur de Lesdiguières sarcastically. In all his time in office, he had never experienced anything remotely like this. André-Louis took the invitation literally.
I thank you, sir.
He answered seriously and presented his argument.
We can prove that Monsieur de Vilmorin never practiced fencing a single day in his life. At the same time, everyone knows that Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr is an exceptional swordsman. Sir, can you call it a duel when only one of the fighters is truly armed? When you compare their levels of skill, it amounts to exactly that. You could make the same cheap argument about almost every duel ever fought. But it wouldn't always be as fair or true. And in at least one case, that exact argument was used successfully in court. Successfully? When was that? 10 years ago in the province of Dauphiny. I am talking about the case of Monsieur de Gesvres, a gentleman there who forced Monsieur de la Roche-Jeannin into a duel and killed him. Monsieur de Jeannin belonged to a powerful family, and they worked hard to get justice. They used the exact same arguments that apply now to Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr. As you might remember, the judges decided that Monsieur de Gesvres intentionally provoked the fight. They found him guilty of premeditated murder, and he was hanged.
Monsieur de Lesdiguières exploded in anger once again.
By my life!
He cried.
Do you have the absolute nerve to suggest that Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr should be hanged? Do you? But why not, sir? If it is the law, and if there is a legal precedent for it, as I just showed you, we can easily prove that what I am saying is the truth. You ask me why not? Do you really have the boldness to ask me that? I do, sir. Can you answer me? If you cannot, sir, then I will understand how things really work. I will understand that the law can be put into motion for a powerful family like La Roche-Jeannin, but it must remain completely paralyzed for obscure, ordinary people, no matter how brutally they have been wronged by a great nobleman.
Monsieur de Lesdiguières realized that arguing would accomplish nothing against this calm and determined young man. His tone became much more threatening.
I advise you to leave at once,
he warned.
You should be thankful that I am letting you walk out of here unharmed. Then I am supposed to understand, sir, that there will be no investigation into this case? That nothing I say will change your mind?
You are to understand this. If you are still standing there in 2 minutes, things will go very badly for you. Monsieur de Lesdiguières rang the silver handbell on his desk.
I have informed you, sir, that a supposed duel has been fought and a man was killed,
André-Louis said.
It seems I must remind you, the administrator of the king's justice, that duels are strictly against the law. It is your official duty to hold an inquiry. I stand here as the legal representative of Monsieur de Vilmorin's grieving mother. I demand the investigation that she is owed.
The door behind André-Louis opened softly. Monsieur de Lesdiguières was pale with anger, barely able to control himself.
You seek to force our hand. Do you impudent rascal?
He growled.
You think the king's justice can be pushed around by the voice of any loudmouthed commoner? I am amazed at my own patience with you. But I give you one last warning, master lawyer. Keep a much closer guard over that disrespectful tongue of yours, or you will have very bitter cause to regret how quickly it moves.
He waved a jeweled hand in contempt and spoke to the usher standing behind André-Louis.
Show him to the door,
He ordered shortly. André-Louis hesitated for a second. Then, with a shrug, he turned around. This was indeed a windmill, and he was nothing but a poor, sad-faced knight. To attack it up close would just mean being smashed to pieces. Yet, as he reached the doorway, he turned back one last time.
Monsieur de Lesdiguières,
He said,
may I tell you an interesting fact about natural history? The tiger is a great lord in the jungle. For centuries, he was the terror of lesser beasts, including the wolf. But the wolf, who is also a hunter, eventually grew tired of being hunted. He began to associate with other wolves. Soon, they were driven to form packs to protect themselves. These wolves discovered the power of the pack. They began hunting the tiger, and it ended disastrously for him. You should really study the naturalist Buffon, Monsieur de Lesdiguières. I think I have studied a buffoon this morning.
Monsieur de Lesdiguières sneered, making a cruel joke. If he hadn't thought he was being so clever, he probably wouldn't have bothered to answer at all.
I don't understand you.
He added,
But you will, Monsieur de Lesdiguières. You will.
said André-Louis, and with that, he departed.